podcast. I am co-host Jon O'Brien, coming to you from the Keystone Contractors Association, right here in good old central Pennsylvania. Joined as always by fellow co-host, and it's always great to see Chris Martin. Chris, it's been 2 weeks, I think, since we've last recorded, since we've been in the studio. So it's great seeing you, brother.
It's been a while. And it's great to see you too, Jon. And I'm glad that we're back today. And you know better than I do that we've got a real professional who's going to talk to us today. And I can't wait. I think this is going to be a really, really not only timely, but really, really important episode. I think we're going to come back and think about this and use this as that tentpole as we have moved forward with all sorts of different good stuff here on the Building PA podcast. But hey, I am Chris Martin, as Jon mentioned. I'm coming to you from lovely downtown Sewickley, out in Western PA, and it's sunny out. And I just happened to step outside, and it felt like there was this warm sensation, and I didn't know what it was in February in Pittsburgh. Like, what is this thing? But enough of that. Let's talk. Jon, what is our topic today?
Yeah. So last year, Chris and I were presenting in Hershey, giving a little presentation, and we thought, let's go early, let's check out the presentation before us. And we're sitting there, and I'm like bumping Chris, and I'm listening into the presenter talk, and I'm like, Chris, how come we've never had this guy on the podcast? And Chris is like, I never met him. I don't know. Well, I met him. How come I've never told you about him? So I dropped the ball.
I was wondering where you were going there for a second. Wait a second.
Yeah. So probably 2 or 3 years ago, I think 3 years ago, maybe I met David Whitesock, and David came on to help the Construction Opioid Awareness Week and made an awesome video. It's up on our YouTube page. Check it out. But we are completely honored and just really excited to have David Whitesock, the founder of Commonly Well, architect of the Recovery Capital Index. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jon. Thanks, Chris. This is fun. That's a pretty big setup. So it's all downhill from here.
You're going to deliver. You delivered in Hershey. You're going to deliver on the podcast. We're excited.
This is what I love to do. This is what's fun. I love getting into these ideas and taking a topic that can be pretty challenging and personally is horrific to me and horrific to a lot of people, addiction, and actually talking about ways that we can get ahead of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from when we listened and had the honor of listening to you tell your story and talk about things in Hershey, we understand that there are a lot of things that you can share and you're going to. But just as Jon said, we're really happy that you're here. I love the story that you're going to talk about and where we're going to go here. But let's dive in here, Jon. I'm going to steal a little bit from your side of the world here and just say, David, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I grew up in a military family in the Dakotas. Pretty quiet upbringing. Got into my parents, I'll give a little background that sort of ties into, my addiction story a little bit. And that is, parents got divorced, things got shaken up a bit, moved to a small rural North Dakota town, trying to figure out who I am as a teenager, and think that I'm going to become an architect and skip ahead a little bit. That doesn't pan out, but I end up in a radio broadcasting career for about a decade and did everything. Did
very
everything.
Fitting, as you can hear.
And you sound great. We sound horrible next to you. So
that's all right. Yeah. I know a guy who can get you some equipment. We'll hook you up.
Good.
And so I got into radio, and it turned out that was sort of the thing that really gave me purpose. And I found myself doing, DJing country music to hosting news throughout the day on an AM radio station, doing talk shows where basically doing this, on radio, interviewing people like me and presidential candidates and smart leaders like yourself, and then also doing sports. The thing that I thought I was going to be was a play-by-play announcer for an NHL hockey team. And that was sort of my trajectory. And things kind of got spun up in there, and we'll talk more about that. But radio was my thing. And But now today, I've taken some of my past experiences and kind of rolled it into how do we, you kind of heard a little bit of my story. I wanted to be an architect. I got into communications, and you kind of take sort of those design thinking and communications and apply that to some hard challenges. And addiction, behavioral health is a difficult challenge that we've got to think a little bit differently about. And so that's kind of who I am and what I've been, with a lot of gaps in between, but that's kind of my story.
Yeah. Well, David, you're also speaking to two communications majors, so it's Communications Day on the Building PA podcast.
It is.
So, you know, well, hey, real quick, can you tell us a little bit about, as the founder of Commonly Well, what is that? What is Commonly Well, and how does that relate to the conversation that we're having today?
Yeah. So it's a company that I founded in May of 2020. Perfect time to start a company when the world is on fire and things are uncertain. But I had transitioned out of a nonprofit that I had been working at for 10 years and started a company to bring forward one particular tool. How do you measure success for individuals overcoming drug and alcohol addiction? How do you measure addiction recovery? And so I had invented an instrument. Was really grateful with the nonprofit that I worked for. They said, go ahead. Yeah, we support you commercializing this. And so that's what I stepped out to do. So what Commonly Well is one, it's the commercialization of this instrument, this tool. But at the end of the day, we're kind of a what we call recovery intelligence consultancy. We work with employers, behavioral health clinics, communities, and any other stakeholder that needs insight and information to put themselves in a better place to solve big social and health problems.
Nice. That's amazing. I think we're going to spend some time in the future, near future, talking about the Recovery Capital Index. So I want to come back to that. But knowing what you know, if someone in podcast land is listening to this and they're suffering with some addiction issues at any level, like, I know it's $1 million question. It's a tough one to answer, but like, what do you tell them? Where do you direct them? And what's kind of the initial responses? And
yeah, I mean, the initial response is that, first of all, this is probably something that you've been struggling with for a while. You've gotten pretty, unfortunately, comfortable in the space. And just know that even on the days when you feel uncomfortable, even getting help is going to be uncomfortable, but you have to kind of lean into that. And I would just simply say that the best place to start is think about all of the people in your life who you feel you have the best relationship with or to, and start there. Just send a text or pick up the phone and just say, this is what I'm struggling with. I don't know what to do next, but I just want you to know I'm having a hard time. I've landed on that as advice simply because what I have found is that our friends and family members, they are waiting for that phone call. Mm-hmm. They have been waiting for years for it. They have been walking around on eggshells, not knowing how to address it with you. They've probably been angry at you and they've yelled at you and they've shamed you and they've done a lot of things to you. And so that's created a division over time, not out of hate, but just simply because of frustration of the problem. But I have found that if you start there, that's a little bit easier than telling somebody, go to a treatment provider or go to a therapist. That's a big leap. Okay. Start with a family member, and the family member can say, all right, let's do this together. Nice. And then you can pick up the phone and take that next step.
Nice. Speaking of your advice and your response and starting your company in May of 2020, has the pandemic changed your advice at all? Because it seemed like there was a lot of isolation, a lot of aloneness, and did it further strengthen your togetherness at all in your response? Or
well, I think before the pandemic, my response would have been call the nonprofit that I worked for, because that's what we did. I mean, the organization was an organization called Face It Together, and it provides peer coaching. And so I would have said, and I still do say, call Face It Together. They're peer coaches. They'll listen to you. They've been there, and it's an easier step but as opposed to talking to a professional to start. But again, this also depends too, John and Chris, on the nature of your condition. I mean, if you're really struggling with some health issues, like if you're having respiratory problems or you're jaundiced or, it's really causing issues or challenges to you medically, go to the doctor. Go, go to the doctor. Go talk to your primary care physician. If it's causing issues or pain in your body and you can't perform at work, we're talking about a construction industry and you can't perform at work, if you can't lift the weight and you can't do the things, go to the doctor. Now, the doctor's going to tell you the same thing. He's going to say, quit drinking or stop drinking or go to treatment or do these things. But the first step is usually just go to somebody in that instance with the most near thing that hurts. Right. And start there. So has it changed? I don't think it's changed. I think what's made it a little bit challenging is that we do a lot more of this, where we're talking through Teams or Zooms, and it becomes, virtual. Nothing against virtual or digital, but I always tell people go find somebody physically in person that's in their community.
Nice. Yeah. David, what I like about your response there is that it's simple enough and it's real. It's not like you said, the easy response is call a therapist. But I mean, I know from personal experience, a therapist, it's going to take you 6 months to get in. Like especially today, as a result of COVID. So turning to a family member, somebody that you can just talk to, and I really, I didn't even realize until you said it. They're waiting for that. Like just the fact that, they, like you said, they're walking on eggshells, or there's frustration or anxiety around you as an individual, just literally having the ability to make that first step, whatever it is, even if it's just, I need help, start in the right direction. So I think that's really, really valuable and real world experience response. So thank you for that. I think that's good.
You're welcome. I'll give you one other bit of advice, and this is sort of what I do. And there are people all around us who've overcome these issues: depression, anxiety, addiction, whatever. They're all around us. Now, if somebody picks up the phone and calls me or sends me a text message, here's typically what I do. And I live in Potsdam, New York, so I'm just north of you guys up in the Adirondacks, and so it's pretty rural here, and I don't know a whole lot of people here, but let's assume I know some people, and they picked up the phone. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say three things. One, you and I are going to sit down and we're just going to have coffee and talk. Right? What got to this point? Why now? Why'd you pick up the phone now? What's going on? Two, we're going to go to a 12-step meeting. You and I together are just going to go sit in a room. We're going to sit in the back and we're just going to listen. We're just going to take it in. Why? Not because that's the answer, not because of anything that I think that's right or wrong, but just because we can just sit and listen to other people's stories. And we don't have to do anything. We just sit. And the last thing to do is we are going to call a therapist, and we're going to get on the phone with somebody and just get you in the room. Now that might take a while, but this is a process. We're not going to get lost into urgency. We're going to begin a process and do a few things and kind of get the wheels turning. What I have found in that process is people typically come up with the answer themselves. Yeah, they'll say, you know what? I really enjoyed sitting down with that therapist. I cannot wait to go back. Or I saw somebody I know in the room of that 12-step meeting. I'm going back there. Is that okay? Yeah, you don't need my permission. Or I enjoyed talking to you like this. Can we do this every week? Yeah. Game over.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great.
That's impressive.
Yeah,
that's impressive.
That's just years. That's just the wisdom of years. It's still not perfect, but it's all I got.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, John.
No, I was going to say.
We do that a lot.
Yeah, I know. What was I going to say? No, but like, you're gaining wisdom over the years and your recovery path. Was your path similar to that towards recovery, or did you have the support system around you?
No, it wasn't even close to that.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, do you want to know? Yeah, it wasn't even close. I mean, not to say that I didn't have family that didn't care about me and friends that didn't care about me. I had coworkers and bosses who kept me in my job for years because they knew what was going on. But I was also the moneymaker, right? I was the guy at the radio station that kept the ad dollars rolling in. They weren't going to fire me. Plus, I was the web designer. I was the guy that could keep the station on the air at 12 in the morning. I'd show up at 3 in the morning if something was wrong. I was chasing tornadoes and I was doing live weather. They couldn't get rid of me until I'm driving drunk in the company vehicle and I get arrested. Now it becomes a thing that's very hard for, a communications company that's very public to keep somebody like me around. And so that's where people start to make choices. But it wasn't like, if I'd, my sister was there, my family cared, they did all the things. It's just, we didn't, I was a hot mess, as the kids say.
Yeah.
I had to go and tumble through 5 DUIs, in and out of jail many times, multiple attempted suicides. I had to do a lot to get to a place where I'd hit a wall, and it was a judge in Winter, South Dakota, who saw me come into her courtroom on a 5th DUI and was like, this is 2005. And she just looked around and said, how in the world did you get here? What did we, and she said this, she goes, what did we do wrong? How did we not step up? And that was the first time I'd heard anything like that. I think there were a lot of people in that courtroom who were like, what is she talking about?
Yeah.
He's the problem. It's not your fault. And she wanted to solve the problem. And she had a tool, twice daily breathalyzers, that she could put me on. And her whole deal was, I'm going to keep you sober long enough and you'll figure it out. And skip ahead 17 years, here we are.
Nice.
Here we are. Yeah.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And it's for everybody who's listening, the fact that for David, it really forced people to make a decision based on the fact that he was driving a company vehicle. And a lot of people, regardless of the industry, regardless of what your job is or your role or whatever it is, there's that rock bottom moment,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just interesting to hear your story where that was it. Like, okay, we can't take this anymore because you're driving around in our car, and here we go. But if I can just shift gears, and I really, really enjoyed your story as we heard in Hershey, and I know you went into a lot more detail there, but how did you get to the point where you were like, okay, I'm going to give back now? Like, it's time for me to, instead of just being that singular person saying, I need to give back.
That's, no one's ever asked the question quite like you did, Chris. And I love it because I had to sit and think for a moment, what was that moment? And it actually is very clear. So I was very fortunate that when I came out of jail, I moved into a sober home in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And in the course of that 6 months, didn't know what I was going to do. I got a part-time job at a radio station, and it just wasn't fulfilling. And it felt like I was just going through the motions of just staying sober until the end of my probation. And it just didn't feel right. And so I asked around, and everybody said, don't do it, David, don't do it. But I wanted to go back to college. And so I went back to the University of South Dakota. And at the time, you had to take a particular class, and it was a global health class. So I'm sitting there in this class, and in that global health, you had to do a volunteer project. And I'm talking to the professor, and I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. And he kind of warmed up to me. I was non-traditional, so he could talk to me like a, human adult, throwing all the kids under the bus. And so he heard my story early, and he said, David, you know what you might consider doing is do a little bit of research on this twice daily breathalyzer you have to do. What is that all about? Because it was brand new in South Dakota. And he goes, dig into that and see what's there. And so that key moment was asking some questions of people who had created this thing, being on it myself, realizing that I am being kept sober with this massive crutch and not being able to live in society with all the fears and all the pressures and all the things. I was pretty secluded. And so I wrote a paper, and then I sent it to the Attorney General, who had created the program. And the moment, Chris, was him writing back with my paper littered in red marking, like any lawyer would just tear something apart and say, this argument's wrong, and here's the reason it's wrong. And I think that was the moment. That was the moment where it said, I can move the needle a little bit. Here is a guy with all the power who created this thing, and I'm a nobody. I'm a convicted felon, and he gave a damn. So maybe there's a here.
Nice.
That's
I
great.
love these stories. I've told the story a few times on the podcast that, we started the Construction Opioid Awareness Week in 2017. And the first week after doing it, I got a call from an electrician out of Reading saying that he's in recovery and you're doing a good thing, keep it up, and something like that drives me and motivates me. And it seems like every year I get some sort of call. It's awesome hearing the story. So thank you for opening up and sharing your story. So.
Yeah, we are social beings. We are story beings. We like to tell stories, and I live in a lot of data, and I think there's a need for data. But at the end of the day, me telling a story, you telling a story, it's what moves us. And so, I'm honored and privileged to be able to share it, and grateful to have it. I have to caveat it though. I wish I didn't have to tell it. Right. I wish I didn't have to go through it. I wish I didn't have to tell it. I'm unlike some people around me go, I'm, a grateful alcoholic. Well, I'm grateful in a lot of ways. I'm not necessarily grateful to have had that horrific experience, but it has meant a ton.
Yeah. And the fact that you were talking about it today, I would have to imagine that that's part of it is therapeutic for you too. And so that you can continue to kind of be that role model, if you will, moving through that process. So as John said, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because that's not the easiest thing, to be open yourself up in vulnerability, which is one of the things that we talk about a lot, not only on the podcast, but, doing other things around mental health and mental issues and challenges like this. Vulnerability becomes one of the biggest elements, right?
It really does. Yeah. And I found myself recently getting a little bit of pushback, because lately I have been sharing on LinkedIn, for instance, that I enjoy non-alcoholic beverages.
I saw that.
And it has opened up some conversation. To me, it just, I flipped a switch a long time ago, and I was like, I like beer. I loved the taste of beer. And I want to find good ones, and I want to be able to share that with people. And so I'd flipped that switch a long time ago, but yeah, we're in a weird and interesting moment. But I would say too, my communications background and the ability that I've gained in skills to stand on a stage or do this and tell a coherent and cogent and powerful story, that's my gift. Mm-hmm. Now, hopefully what that means is that others don't necessarily have to do that. What they can do is they can get the internal motivation. They can find out where they can be vulnerable themselves, but maybe get the strength to just be able to move forward, find growth in their own world, and take whatever they've learned and just go be great. Mm-hmm. And if that can happen, because not everybody wants to tell their story. Not everybody wants to do that. And you might work in a field like construction where there's still a lot of fear and shame and a lot of that stuff. Just overcome it and find a new thing in you and listen to other people and go, that's me, but nobody else needs to know it. They just need to know that I'm great at what I do.
Yeah.
And go tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So our producer's probably jotting down notes like, when are they going to talk about the recovery capital index?
This is the fun stuff. We don't have to talk about that. What I'm really curious to know is what I love about what you're doing, and I've listened to a lot of the past episodes, is just hearing how people come to the work they do in construction and how they bring like other life skills into that work. Because I think when a lot of people think of construction, they just think building buildings, laying pavement, and sketches and diagrams and hard hats, but there's a lot of like humanness in how that stuff gets built, and I just love hearing the way you guys bring those stories together.
It's a relationship-based business, so absolutely.
Yes, 100%. But I'm going to jump on John's comment though. I'm interested to learn a little bit more about the Recovery Capital Index too. Not that we don't want to. I have a feeling the three of us could talk for hours
Yes.
about a lot of this stuff, and unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. But so my understanding of the Recovery Capital Index is that, like you said at the beginning here, it's a way to measure success. So what kind of got you to the point of going, we need this?
Well, a couple of things. One, society has a particular definition of success around substance use disorder, drug and alcohol addiction, and that comes down to sober or not, clean or not. And that binary of yes or no, that is a data point. It is a measure of success, so long as that person has chosen that being sober for the rest of their life is the thing that they choose. Now, one of the challenges with that is if I go 30 days and I'm doing great, and then on day 31, I use again, society says I failed. And my internal being says, everything is saying you failed, you failed, you failed, you failed. And you got to start over. And now it's day 0 again. Psychologically, that is ruinous. It has killed people. And so how do we flip that story? Well, let's look at all the other parts of your life that you've been working on. You know, you lost your job, you got a new one. It's better than the one before. You lost your kid, but you got your kid back. You went from living in a halfway house to renting your own apartment, or you went from renting an apartment to actually owning a home. You thought you were somebody who liked holding the sign on the road, you know, in the construction field, to actually somebody who likes to think about where do we put those signs? And you found a different purpose inside your field, or a completely different field. Like, we can measure those things. And so why don't we measure those things? Because then we can say, hey, Chris, you had a return to use and it wasn't really that bad. But that's not what you wanted. But, oh, by the way, look at the rest of your life.
Right.
So the Recovery Capital Index is an assessment. It's an inventory that's quantified from 1 to 100 that allows us to break apart into 22 indicators the rest of your life. And so you can tell yourself a different story. We're using psychology and behavioral economics and narrative and numbers to try to show and tell a different story.
That's
is
really
this like
cool.
a self-awareness project, or is it in peer groups, or?
Well, all of the above. So,
Yeah, okay.
So the origin story really is I'm working for a peer coaching organization. We were funded in a lot of different ways, but one of our funders was a large integrated health system. And the CEO of that health system came in to talk to our 2 co-founders on a Friday afternoon. I happened to be in the office that day, minding my business at my desk. The important people were in the conference room. And in the course of that conversation, the CEO of the health system said, guys, we love what you do. We love the coaching that you offer. We love the stories that people tell of overcoming their issues and challenges. We love that as a redemption story. It's important for our community, but it's not evidence. And if you really want to work with us, a health system, you're going to need some data. And so one of the co-founders just got up out of the meeting. His belief was, if you're sitting in a meeting and you hear what you're supposed to hear, the meeting's over. And he literally got up, walked over to my desk and said, David, you've got 30 days, figure out how to measure recovery. And I kind of looked at Charlie and I said, Charlie, I'm 9,000 days sober. Isn't that it? And he looked back at me and he goes, I wouldn't have walked over here if that was the answer. And so that was 2012. And that was the opening of the rabbit hole. I like to describe it as if you've seen The Matrix, of being presented the red pill and the blue pill. Take one and you go back to your regular life. Blue, you go down into the Cinderella story or whatever that is. And I take both pills because I want to really get crazy. And so skip ahead, you talk to a lot of scientists, a lot of people who've measured quality of life and well-being and happiness and thriving and flourishing. We've been measuring this stuff for 80 plus years. We know how to do it. We've just never applied it to the addiction and recovery space, because our measure of success was sober, not sober, not how's your life.
what I really like about this, actually, I love about this is it's a whole mindset shift from, like you said, sober or not sober, to look at all the things that you've accomplished, which is such an integral part of dealing with something like this, whether it's anxiety or sobriety. You're dealing with, it's not just a narrow viewpoint. Look at all the beautiful things that have happened beyond that. And it really kind of puts it there. So my question now is there a number? Is there a component that says, okay, I got 80 on the recovery capital index or something like that? Is it that measurable like that?
Yeah. It's that measurable. So the way it breaks, the way you get a number, you get an 80, right? And if you take it the first time, that's what we call your baseline. It's kind of like if you hadn't measured your weight for a long time and you stood on the scale and it says 200 pounds, okay, that's where we're starting. Now you might say to yourself, I don't like being 200 pounds, right? And
I'd dance a jig if I was 200 pounds.
I know, I'm looking at all of us going, I don't know. I'm nearing there. That's why that number came out. That's my anchor point. It's
hey,
like,
you
I
don't
don't
have to
want
rub
to
it
go
in. You don't have to rub it in, though.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. Come on, David.
Oh my goodness. But that's our anchor point, right? That's just where we start. It's not good, it's not bad, but it's where we start. And then we get to make a judgment on that. Do we want to go up or down? What's better for us? And but beyond that, we get a bunch more scores. So we break that score down into 3 different domains. So what we call personal capital, those areas that are like your job, your financial well-being, your mental and emotional well-being, housing, those sorts of things. Then your social capital, your friend network, your family group. Do you feel safe with the people you're around? Those sorts of things. And then the third is cultural capital. This is, who are you in the bigger scheme of things? And do you have a relationship that you like within your community? What's your purpose? And so within those 3 areas, you get 3 different scores. So you might have an 80, but you might have a 75, an 80, and an 85, right? Now we roll that down even further. We peel the layers back even further. And now we've got 9 components under those 3 areas. And then we've got 22 indicators below. And so you might have a score of like a 50 for, say, nutrition. So we've been doing this for a long time. Financial well-being, nutrition, spirituality, mental and emotional well-being, those are almost always the bottom 4 scores across the board. Doesn't matter if you are employed, not employed, early recovery, long time, survivor. Those tend to always be at the bottom. These are natural human struggles.
I gotta share a quick little story here. So this morning I'm driving my middle daughter to school. She didn't take the bus today, and I was so upset about that. But anyways, so I'm driving home and I'm listening to the radio, and they said after the break we're gonna talk about a study from Harvard, which you guys might know about. I just heard about. Talk about a study from Harvard. It measures success in life.
Yeah.
They said they've been at this for, I think they said 70 or 80 years. They got this study and they're finally ready to publish it. And it boils down to, this was the radio broadcaster saying this, it boils down to personal relationships and how you interact with people, and do you have that network within. It doesn't talk about, money, financial success, and how many homes you have. It's all about relationships and kind of what we've been talking about all day here today. So it has me wanted to Google and find that study so I could read more about it.
Yeah, it's called the Personal Development Study from Harvard. They've been doing it since 1934. Sometimes if you just search happiness in Harvard, you kind of get those results. But it started out by measuring like 100 or 200 or 700 people at Harvard over the 30s. And John F. Kennedy was one of them. Bill Bradley was one of them in the study. And they've been doing it continuously now since the 1930s. And it is the world's greatest insight into what makes humans thrive. And it is other humans.
Yeah.
Period. I won't stand up and say the 12 steps or AA or NA is necessarily the answer, but the presentation at the conference in Hershey, part of what I talked about was this idea of keystone habits. And that comes from a lot of different places, but there's a book called The Power of Habits from Charles Duhigg. And he talks about these keystone habits, and he kind of dives into Alcoholics Anonymous. And in it by doing the steps and by creating this new process of engaging in a meeting and doing the steps and meeting a sponsor and all that stuff, that creates new habits. But in the middle of it, a lot of the science does say about, folks that use that as a method of overcoming things. Ultimately, what it comes down to is you go into a room with a bunch of people like you build new relationships, better relationships, long-lasting relationships, and that becomes a big key point, a big key turning point for a lot of people. And so, if you're looking around now, and on the other side of this, there's, as much as that study is out there, there's also a bunch of studies lately that have been showing that in the last 20 years, we have gone, at least in the United States, we have gone from a people that have had 5 to 7 best friends or really close friends down to 1. Wow. And so we know what we need to have to be well and thrive in life. And we had a lot more friends around us 10, 15, 20 years ago or longer. Today, for whatever reason, whether it be technology or social media or whatever, when people are asked, how many close friends do you have? The average answer is a little over 1.
Wow. That's amazing.
Wow.
So go out and make a friend.
Make a friend.
Do it right now.
Wow. Yeah. Well, hey, David, I have to say thank you so much. I like I said before, I feel like the three of us could talk for hours and hours and hours, and unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. But real quick, I want to tell our listeners, if you want to learn more about the Recovery Capital Index, visit recoverycapital.io. And I think everyone can find that would be something that may be of value, not only to themselves, but to a family member, a friend. As David said, we need more of those.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a way to make a friend, or you can text MEASURE, MEASURE, to 833-280-3781. That'll help you get more of the Recovery Capital Index. David, on behalf of the Building PA podcast and John, he'll say thank you as well, but thank you for joining us today. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure. I love talking to you guys, and maybe we'll get a chance to do it in person and some other time.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, David.